everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Naruto Infinite Reincarnation, Chapter 91 to 96, Chapter 91, The Uzumaki Clan's Problem 1869 words Chapter 91, The Uzumaki Clan's Problem, is that so? Listening to Homura's report, Kei nodded, not particularly surprised. That isn't strange. After all, the Uzumaki clan was living perfectly well where it was. And now Konoha wanted them to uproot their entire clan, and move to Konoha with just a single invitation. How could that possibly be easy? One had to remember that the land of whirlpools was not merely their home. It was their sovereign nation. Living there, the Uzumaki clan possessed absolute autonomy. Why would they willingly run to Konoha? Unfortunately, if they continued clinging to that mindset, trouble was only a matter of time. The land of whirlpools lay isolated overseas. Although it was close to Konoha, there was still a certain distance between them. Its own overall strength was not especially great, and yet it possessed the strongest sealing techniques in the entire shinobi world. Members of the Uzumaki clan generally carried a bloodline trait of their own. Not only were they born with enormous chakra, but many also possessed tenacious life force, making them ideal material for becoming shinobi or even tailed beast Jinchuriki. Bloodline traits. Sealing techniques. Rare compatibility as tailed beast vessels. They possessed nearly everything the outside world found scarce and precious. And yet they remained isolated overseas, maintaining relations with no one other than Konoha. An existence like that was bound to attract covetous eyes. The original history was the clearest proof. If nothing changed, then in a few years the land of whirlpools would be destroyed, and the surviving clansmen would scatter across the shinobi world as refugees. That was likely how people like Nagato and Karen later came into being. In later generations, some claimed Konoha had played an ignoble role in that disaster, deliberately failing to send aid when the land of whirlpools was attacked, which ultimately led to its destruction. But after becoming Hokage, Kei felt that was unlikely. Setting aside the fact that Konoha and the land of whirlpools were allies, the value of those sealing techniques alone was enough to ensure Konoha could never casually give them up. One had to understand that throughout the entire shinobi world, because of people like Mito, Konoha was the only force capable of learning the Uzumaki clan's sealing arts. To put it plainly, that was a unique advantage Konoha possessed. That could also be seen in later generations. Compared to the seals used on the Jinchuriki of other villages, Naruto's seal, as the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, was far more stable. Unless he encountered extreme danger, the Nine Tails within him did not seriously affect him at all. The Jinchuriki of other villages were nowhere near so fortunate. Kumogakure was slightly better off. Their sealing techniques were not strong enough on their own, but they at least had the amber purifying pot, one of the 6 paths tools, to compensate, so no major catastrophe occurred. Even so, the 8 Tails Jinchuriki had rampaged more than once before things finally stabilized with Killer Bee. The Sand Village was far worse. To seal Shikaku, several generations of Jinchuriki had suffered miserably. The last one-tailed Jinchuriki, Gaara, had even been pushed half into madness, only recovering later after being pulled back by Naruto's talk no jutsu. The difference was enormous. From that alone, one could see just how powerful and stable the Uzumaki clan's sealing arts were. Under such circumstances, what benefit would Konoha gain if the Uzumaki clan were wiped out and its sealing techniques were plundered by enemy villages? At the same time, however, it was also indisputable that Konoha had not provided large-scale assistance when the land of whirlpools was attacked. But after becoming Hokage and giving the matter some thought, Kei had already formed a rough idea of why. The land of whirlpools is isolated overseas. In the conference room, Kei pointed at the map and spoke calmly. Although it is close to the land of fire, there is still a considerable distance between it and Konoha. Once something happens there, it will be very difficult for us to reinforce them in time. Would it really be that serious? Hearing Kei's explanation, those present looked uncertain. The land of whirlpools is not weak. Even if something happens, shouldn't they be able to hold out until our reinforcements arrive? The Uzumaki clan, which possessed a powerful bloodline and world-renowned sealing techniques, could not be called weak by any means. In their view, even if a surprise attack happened, the Uzumaki clan should still be able to hold for several days until Konoha arrived. That would be true under normal circumstances. Kei's voice remained level. But what if the force making the move is Kumogakure? Kumogakure? The moment those words were spoken, everyone present went still. It is no secret that Kumogakure likes to seize bloodline traits and secret techniques from others. Kei spoke softly. In that regard, the Uzumaki clan's bloodline and sealing techniques are famous throughout the world. Would Kumogakure really not be tempted? There are tailed beast vessels here, superior sealing techniques, and the Uzumaki bloodline itself. With Kumogakure's nature, would they really refrain from striking? Hearing this, the expressions around the room turned solemn. They had to admit that what Kei said was entirely plausible. After all, Kumogakure had a long history in that regard. To some extent, that village was little different from a den of bandits. Relying on their military strength, many of the secret techniques and bloodline traits they possessed had been taken from outside sources. Their reputation in this area was terrible. For example, in the future, they would take advantage of Hyuga Hinata's birthday in an attempt to kidnap her and seize the Byakugan. That was Kumogakure. The attempt to kidnap Kushina Uzumaki while she was still young in order to seize the Uzumaki bloodline and sealing arts. That was also Kumogakure. Even the Sand Village's distinctive magnet release had its shadow in some Kumogakure shinobi. And while the theft of secret techniques was less obvious, Konoha had the sword art dance of the crescent moon, while Kumogakure later possessed cloud-style crescent moon slash. It was hard to believe that was mere coincidence. At the Five Kage summit in later years, even Inoki had openly complained about Kumogakure's habit of plundering every bloodline and technique they could get their hands on. With so many prior offenses, it was impossible to assume they would not set their sights on the Uzumaki clan. And considering both geography and opportunity, besides Konoha, the force most capable of striking the Uzumaki clan was indeed Kumogakure. Surely it wouldn't really go that far. Kagami was stunned, sounding uncertain. We only just signed a ceasefire agreement, and the Third Reikage only just took office. Would he really want to go to war with us again so soon? The Uzumaki clan and Konoha were allies. If Kumogakure attacked the land of whirlpools, that would be equivalent to openly provoking Konoha. And the ceasefire between Konoha and Kumogakure had only just been established. Not right now, perhaps. Kei shook his head. But in the future? That is much harder to say. As for the ceasefire agreement, that thing is no more than a scrap of paper. If I were the Reikage, then once I made up my mind to move against the Uzumaki clan, I would act with extreme caution. I would wait until Konoha relaxed for a moment, then directly lead a large force to strike the land of whirlpools, destroy the country before Konoha could react, seize everything worth taking, and retreat immediately. Even if Konoha stays wary, as long as Kumogakure is patient, they will eventually find an opportunity. By the time the land of whirlpools is truly destroyed, Konoha may have only just begun to react. And then what? Would Konoha go to war with Kumogakure all over again for the sake of a nation that had already been destroyed? Hearing those words, everyone present frowned. It was indeed a thorny problem. Given Kumogakure's style, they would not be restrained by fear of war. If they truly waited until the land of whirlpools was destroyed and their objective achieved, then even if Konoha was unwilling, it could only swallow the loss. And the most troublesome point was that there did not seem to be any easy solution. After all, one can guard against a thief for a day, but not for 1,000. Kumogakure could keep its eyes on the land of whirlpools indefinitely, waiting for Konoha to slip once. But Konoha could not remain vigilant every single moment. From Konoha to the land of whirlpools, if we mobilized a shinobi army, it would take at least 5 days at the fastest. Hamura frowned while studying the map. 5 days. If Kumogakure truly struck, then by the time we arrived, the land of whirlpools might already be gone. What if we station troops there directly? Danzo suddenly offered a suggestion. Place Konoha forces permanently inside the land of whirlpools. That way we can protect them in advance. The objection came immediately. The land of whirlpools is only our ally, not our subordinate. We have no justification to station troops there. And even if we did, who would bear the cost of that garrison? If the burden falls on the land of whirlpools, it may only provoke dissatisfaction within the Uzumaki clan. That was the real problem. The Uzumaki clan and Konoha were not bound as ruler and vassal. They were merely allies. If Konoha suddenly insisted on stationing troops inside the land of whirlpools, how would the Uzumaki clan feel about it? It would be a clear loss of sovereignty. The land of whirlpools would never agree. At that point, everyone in the room realized just how troublesome the problem truly was. From a strategic perspective, the land of whirlpools had to be protected. But because of the distance involved, if something really happened, Konoha would never be able to arrive in time. The issue seemed almost unsolvable. This won't work and that won't work. Danzo frowned, then spoke coldly. If none of these solutions work, then let us strike first. In any case, the secret techniques of the Uzumaki clan must not fall into the hands of any other village. Strike first. Hamura looked toward him. What do you mean? Exactly what I mean. Danzo's voice was calm. We strike first, wipe out the Uzumaki clan before anyone else can, and take control of all their sealing techniques and bloodline traits ourselves. That way, there will be no hidden danger. You really dare say it? Hearing Danzo's words, everyone in the room fell silent. They looked at him and, at that moment, found him utterly unfamiliar. No matter what, the Uzumaki clan and Konoha were allies. They had been discussing how to save the Uzumaki clan in the future. But Danzo had simply cut through the matter with a chilling bluntness. If Konoha destroyed the Uzumaki clan first, then no one else would be able to destroy them later. If you don't want to wait for the next update, read 10 to 50 chapters ahead on p@trian.com/fanficlord03, Chapter 92, Chapter 92, Threat from the Daimyo. 1925 words Chapter 92, Threat from the Daimyo. Hearing Danzo's words, Kei could not help but twitch at the corner of his mouth. For a moment, he did not even know what to say. Destroying one's own ally first so the enemy would not have a chance to do it instead was not the kind of thing an ordinary person could even bring themselves to say. But if it was Danzo, then somehow it felt perfectly reasonable. It fit his character completely. To profit at the expense of others, without any bottom line at all, that was Danzo's nature. Originally, in his youth, this side of him had not been especially obvious. But the more power he gained, the more clearly it revealed itself. And truthfully, if they followed Danzo's proposal, it actually did have quite a bit of practical value. After all, given the relationship between Konoha and the Uzumaki clan, the Uzumaki would never expect Konoha to suddenly strike first. As long as Konoha arranged for people to enter the land of whirlpools and then launched a surprise attack, they could likely wipe out the Uzumaki clan with little difficulty. The entire process might not even cost them many losses. After all, in the eyes of the Uzumaki clan, Konoha was unquestionably one of their own. They would never be properly on guard against them. Once the Uzumaki clan was destroyed, all of their sealing techniques and bloodline inheritance would fall completely into Konoha's hands, leaving no chance for others to seize them. The plan was, in truth, highly feasible. And the benefits were obvious. The only problem was that it was utterly shameless. Have you gone mad, Danzo? Hamura and the others stared at him, as if they were looking at a lunatic. The Uzumaki clan is our ally, and you actually dare entertain thoughts like that? So what if they are our ally? And so what if they are not? Under their gaze, Danzo's expression remained perfectly calm, cold to the bone. In this chaotic age, ally and enemy are merely positions on a wheel. They can change at any time. The Uzumaki clan may be Konoha's ally today, but who can say whether they will not betray Konoha tomorrow? Only by firmly holding the Uzumaki clan's sealing techniques and bloodline in our own hands can Konoha avoid future losses and prevent others from taking them. You really have lost your mind. Hamura and the others found his words difficult to accept. The originally quiet meeting room quickly dissolved into argument. Kei stood to the side and watched them quarrel with some amusement in his eyes. After becoming Hokage, he had finally begun to understand Hiruzen's original state of mind. From the position of Hokage, people who worked diligently were indispensable. But at the same time, someone like Danzo, a person who could handle the ugliest, dirtiest work for Konoha, also could not be completely absent. Otherwise, if everyone in the village had standards that were too clean, then when something truly unspeakable needed doing, there might not even be anyone capable of carrying it out. Danzo was unquestionably the best candidate for dealing with Konoha's filth. Seeing the argument before him becoming more and more heated, Kei raised a hand and stopped it. Danzo, speak less. He said indifferently, whatever the future may hold, for now the land of whirlpools is still our ally. Under that premise, what we should be discussing is how to stop Kumogakure from attacking our ally, not how to murder our own ally first. Lady Mito is still in the village. At present, Mito was still alive in Konoha. Given her ties to the Uzumaki clan, there was no way she would sit and watch Konoha move against her own people. That was far too unrealistic. If Konoha tried to act against the Uzumaki clan, there would be a great many consequences to deal with afterward. Mito simply disliked conflict. That did not mean she lacked the power for it. Danzo likely did not truly understand how terrifying Mito was, which was why he could speak so arrogantly now. From the very beginning, his proposal had no chance of becoming reality. Kei, you will regret this. Hearing Kei's words, Danzo fixed his gaze on him, and there was obvious disappointment in his eyes. What kind of situation is this? For some reason, looking at Danzo's face and listening to his tone, Kei suddenly felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Thus, in front of everyone, he spoke again. I am the Hokage. Rejected by Kei, Danzo slammed the door and walked out, carrying the air of a man convinced that the whole world was drunk while he alone remained sober. That really did feel satisfying. Watching that scene, a smile appeared on Kei's face. He then turned toward Koharu. Within the Land of Fire, where is the closest location to the Land of Whirlpools? It should be this stretch of coastline here, nearest to the Land of Whirlpools. Koharu took the map, searched it for a moment, and then pointed it out. From there, it would take only half a day to reach the Land of Whirlpools and provide support. Then we'll build a base there. You spoke evenly. It just so happens that our control over the Land of Fire should deepen as well. Some time earlier, while the allied Konoha and Kumogakure forces had been fighting the Kinkaku brothers' rebellion, many other things had also been happening across the Land of Fire. For instance, large numbers of Konoha shinobi had already been dispatched from Konoha to suppress bandits throughout the country. At first, the daimyo of the Land of Fire and the local nobles had been supportive. After all, suppressing bandits benefited them too. A stable domain was always better than a lawless one. And in the beginning, the results of this campaign had indeed been impressive. Under the Konoha shinobi's strikes, bandit groups vanished one after another, and public security reached levels not seen in a long time. But after that, the local lords gradually began to realize that something was wrong. The Konoha shinobi were indeed serious about suppressing bandits. But after suppressing the bandits, why were they not leaving? That was the issue. Under Kei's orders, Konoha shinobi had set up small outposts all throughout the Land of Fire. These outposts were often built along smooth roads, major trade routes, and prosperous commercial paths, all under the banner of anti-bandit operations. At first, they really were being used to suppress bandits. But later, their function changed. Those anti-bandit outposts quietly became toll stations. Their main role shifted from suppressing bandits to collecting transit fees from passing merchants. No matter who wanted to pass through, anyone crossing those points had to pay. The justification was wonderfully elegant. A route protection fee. After all, we are sending troops to protect your safety on the road. Isn't it only reasonable that you pay a little protection fee? You should know, our anti-bandit work is free. At that point, the nobles and the daimyo of the Land of Fire learned a valuable lesson. What is free is often the most expensive thing of all. Once Konoha's anti-bandit units entered a region, the bandits disappeared, but Konoha itself never left. And there was absolutely nothing those nobles could do about it. They could not win by force. Within the Land of Fire, Konoha was the strongest military body, and the only real one. Across the entire country, Konoha could confidently say there was no one who could stand against it. Even independent groups like the Fire Temple, which possessed some degree of strength, would still be easily crushed if they dared oppose Konoha head-on. And nominally, Konoha still remained the military institution of the Land of Fire, while the Hokage was recognized as the supreme military commander of the country, personally endorsed by the daimyo himself. As the supreme military leader of the Land of Fire, it was only natural for the Hokage to carry out anti-bandit operations and martial control throughout the territory, was it not? Establishing permanent outposts for long-term anti-bandit work was also perfectly reasonable, was it not? Konoha not only possessed overwhelming force, but it also held the proper name and authority for acting. It was the legitimate military organization of the Land of Fire, sanctioned by the daimyo. If those nobles wished to resist, they were free to try. But if they were too reckless, they might also discover all sorts of unfortunate ways to die. Drowning by accident. Sudden disappearance. And so on. In this world, making someone commit suicide was not difficult at all. A single glare from the Sharingan, supplemented with Genjutsu, and an ordinary person would not even have the chance to resist. In just a short period of time, Konoha had already begun hollowing out the noble class of the Land of Fire through those outposts. And once things had reached that stage, Kei's next plan was naturally to establish military bases throughout the Land of Fire, so as to bring the entire country more firmly under control. This was both a practical necessity and a natural part of development. Only after reaching that stage could he truly draw out the full potential of the Land of Fire. And now, since the issue of protecting the Uzumaki clan had also arisen, the timing was perfect. Designate this location as base number 1 and begin construction immediately. He gave the order plainly. Once construction is complete, you will take the lead in stationing forces there and ensuring the safety of the Land of Whirlpools. Koharu nodded. What does the daimyo think of our actions during this period? Kei's then turned toward Hamura. The daimyo seems to have quite a few complaints. Hamura hesitated for a moment before answering. As for the village setting up checkpoints and collecting tariffs throughout the Land of Fire, the daimyo appears extremely angry. If this continues, the village may lose the daimyo's funding. Lose the daimyo's funding? A smile appeared on Kei's face. Is that all? Actually, he said many other things as well. Hamura replied. But for now, the only true leverage he has over the village is that annual funding. The so-called daimyo was, in the end, only that much. If the shinobi had never realized the strength they truly held in their own hands, and had remained content to act merely as tools beneath the daimyo, that would be one matter. But once shinobi understood that these so-called daimyo were really just paper tigers, frail and hollow, then the title of daimyo ceased to amount to much. Like right now. Faced with Konoha's gradual expansion and encroachment throughout the Land of Fire, the only real threat the daimyo could still make was to cut off the annual subsidy. Nothing but paper tigers. Kei's laughed softly, utterly unconcerned. And not only him. The others present were equally unmoved by the daimyo's threat. If the daimyo refused to provide village funding, that would have been an extremely serious matter for many other villages. Handled poorly, it could have directly affected the village's survival. Sunagakure was the clearest example of that. But for Konoha as it now stood, it meant nothing. The reason was simple. They had money. If you don't want to wait for the next update, read 10 to 50 chapters ahead on p@trian.com/fanficlord03, Chapter 93, Chapter 93, Experiment 1868 words Chapter 93, Experiment K's financial reforms in Konoha had been a tremendous success. The establishment of village-run enterprises alone had already become a huge supplement to the village's finances. At present, Konoha had monopolized industries such as tobacco and casinos throughout the entire Land of Fire. Aside from Konoha, any other enterprise daring to operate in those fields was deemed illegal, and would inevitably be crushed under the iron fist of Konoha's shinobi. Both were highly profitable industries. After monopolizing the entire market within the Land of Fire, the funds they brought into Konoha each month had reached a level that would have been unimaginable in the past. Compared to those profits, the village's old income from commissions had already become negligible. In addition, customs duties from various regions were also being collected one after another. When K had first established the departments of commerce and transportation, many people had not understood the point of the latter. Now, however, they understood. As Konoha shinobi suppressed bandits in different regions, toll stations had been established at major transportation hubs to tax passing caravans and merchants. Because this had only begun recently, the revenue from it still could not compare to the enormous returns from tobacco and casinos, but its potential was already obvious. Given enough time, it was only a matter of time before the income from transportation duties surpassed even the profits from tobacco and gambling. Incidentally, K had handed the transportation department over to the Uchiha clan. Although many shinobi from other clans were also involved, nearly half of the key positions were occupied by members of the Uchiha. The cold and proud Uchiha, aided by the Sharingan, might not necessarily excel in every kind of work, but tax collection and bandit suppression were not a problem for them at all. Because of their positions in this department, many Uchiha shinobi had already made their fortunes, and the entire Uchiha clan had become increasingly wealthy. With so much extra income pouring in, the daimyo's funding, which had once seemed quite valuable, now looked rather insignificant. K had proven through facts that once Konoha possessed overwhelming military force, it could take whatever it wanted from the Land of Fire. Why would they still care about the scraps tossed down by the daimyo? The daimyo is still, after all, the ruler of the Land of Fire. It would not be good to fall out with him too abruptly. Among those present, Uchiha Kagami remained relatively calm. After thinking for a while, he spoke up. K, why not leave this matter to me? You want to persuade the daimyo? K looked at him with some curiosity. I have no way to persuade the daimyo. Meeting K's gaze, Kagami shook his head. But I am confident that I can control him without anyone else discovering it. My genjutsu is very subtle. Ordinary people would never notice it. He was clearly very confident in his own ability with genjutsu. Everyone present could not help looking sideways. So after all that, the persuasion you meant was simply using genjutsu to control him. It had to be admitted, though, that it was an extremely tempting idea. The so-called daimyo was ultimately just an ordinary person. If he could be controlled through genjutsu, then everything Konoha intended to do within the Land of Fire would become vastly more convenient. At the very least, the political resistance they faced would be reduced significantly. However, if this were discovered, Konoha would become a public enemy. Hamura spoke up at this moment, clearly opposed. If such a thing came to light, it would be highly inappropriate. Using genjutsu to control a daimyo. If that were exposed, it would inevitably trigger the hostility of the daimyos of every nation. At that point, all of them would likely give full support to their respective hidden villages in a joint war against Konoha. If things reached that point, the situation would become very bad. My genjutsu is extremely subtle. Ordinary people cannot detect it. Kagami still trusted his own skill. In the entire Land of Fire, aside from Konoha shinobi, there are definitely not many people who could see through it. There's no need. K shook his head and rejected Kagami's proposal in the end. The risk is too high, and it is unnecessary for us. For Konoha, there were many ways to make the daimyo behave without having to break an unspoken taboo like that. Whether through a combination of threat and reward, or simply replacing him with a more obedient daimyo, either method would be simpler and more reliable than Kagami's plan. At this stage, Kei only wanted to stay in Konoha and focus on development. He had no intention of starting a war against the entire ninja world. Or rather, even if there was to be a war, it should wait until they possessed enough strength. Send someone to persuade him properly first. He spoke calmly. If he truly refuses to cooperate, then we'll consider other methods. As for now, let's return to Konoha. To Kei, the gains from this trip had already been significant enough. The Six Paths tool, the Bashozen, was one matter. But the most important harvest had been the Kinkaku brothers. These two powerful figures, who carried an unusually pure Six Paths bloodline, were exceptional research materials and meant a great deal to Kei. At this point, he was already somewhat impatient to return to Konoha and conduct a thorough study of them. Following Kei's orders, the group began moving back toward Konoha. 10 days later, they returned to the village. And within those 10 days, Konoha itself had already begun to change dramatically. Relocations were underway in many places, and one construction project after another had been launched, bringing about enormous changes to Konoha in a very short time. Under Kei's leadership, Konoha was not only earning money, but spending it just as boldly. Recently alone, he had launched several major projects. Aside from the restructuring of the Ninja Academy, he had also begun a complete renovation plan for the entire village, intending to repair all of Konoha's roads and sewage systems while reinforcing the barrier around Konoha's perimeter to prevent future accidents. At the same time, a high-spec laboratory had also begun operating. Kei had poured an enormous amount of effort into it, spending huge sums to acquire high-precision instruments and related equipment. To put it bluntly, the funds spent on this laboratory alone were enough to rival a major engineering project. And in addition to equipment, there were also numerous researchers involved, including professional medical ninjas and experts from among ordinary civilians, all serving as part of the supporting staff. The first heavyweight experimental subject to enter the laboratory, after it officially began operation, had been personally brought back by Kei himself. So these are the corpses of the Kinkaku brothers. Inside the laboratory, Uzumaki Mito looked at the two bodies before her with visible interest. Strictly speaking, however, only Ginkaku was truly a corpse. Kinkaku had been captured alive by Kei, and was still under control, completely stripped of his ability to resist and reduced to top-grade laboratory material. There really is the aura of the Nine Tails chakra. Uzumaki Mito stared at the Kinkaku brothers, and her expression gradually turned solemn. To gain a tailed beast's chakra by devouring its flesh and blood, to think such a thing could actually exist in this world. Not only did they obtain tailed beast chakra, but through that method they also gained the ability to undergo tailed beast transformation directly and even release tailed beast balls. Kei spoke quietly. If the two of them were placed on a battlefield, they would be comparable to actual tailed beasts. In all honesty, the abilities of the Kinkaku brothers were truly formidable. The tailed beast transformation they could achieve was not weak at all. At the very least, they could reach a level equivalent to 6 tails. To be frank, at that stage, aside from the 8 tails and the 9 tails, the strongest among the 9-tailed beasts, the others were probably only around that level themselves. In other words, by devouring tailed beast flesh and blood, the Kinkaku brothers had effectively produced 2-tailed beast-level existences. No, considering that they could retain their sanity during tailed beast transformation, and did not have to worry about seal leakage or similar instability, they were in some ways even stronger than ordinary Jinchuriki. Looking at the brothers before her, even Mito, the 9 tails Jinchuriki, showed a trace of astonishment. To her, the Kinkaku brothers were genuinely incredible beings. As a Jinchuriki herself, she understood the weaknesses of that state better than anyone, which only made the existence of men like the Kinkaku brothers seem even more remarkable. Do you want to study their bodies and uncover their secret? Mito asked. And then use that method to mass-produce tailed beasts? If it's possible, then naturally we should try. Kay nodded. If we could mass-produce a batch of tailed beast-level warriors, that would be an enormous advantage. It could drastically reduce our losses in war. But in reality, achieving that will probably be very difficult. He continued explaining, the bloodline of these two is very special. They are suspected to be descendants of the legendary Sage of Six Paths. That is likely why they can consume tailed beast flesh and blood without dying. If it were an ordinary person, they would probably fail outright. Even if they somehow survived, it would still be very hard for them to gain the tailed beast's abilities. If Kay remembered correctly, later on in Kumogakure, someone had once tried to imitate the Kinkaku brothers by eating the Eight Tails tentacles in an attempt to obtain its power. But every such attempt had failed in the end. The only successful examples were the brothers standing before him now. Their success was closely tied to the Six Paths bloodline within them. After all, the Sage of Six Paths had been the creator of the tailed beasts, and the Jinchuriki of the 10 tails, the origin of all 9 tailed beasts. Only his bloodline could plausibly integrate with the power contained in tailed beast flesh and blood. Of course, Kay estimated that he himself might also be capable of it. After all, he possessed Otsutsuki karma. Though his current body was incomplete, it could already be considered a partial Otsutsuki vessel, which theoretically gave him a chance to accept and fuse with tailed beast power. However, he had no intention of taking that risk himself. After all, success would be one thing. But if he failed, the consequences would likely be devastating. Kay did not want his reincarnation to end prematurely for such a reason, before even reaching the 50-year limit. In addition to the flesh and blood of the Kinkaku brothers, there is one more thing. Looking at Mito, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face, but he still spoke. Shodai-sama's cells are also extremely valuable experimental material. Check out my newly released fanfic on my second account, Fanfic Lord 02. I became a demon sword and traveled the anime worlds. Chapter 94, the combination of Hashirama cells and Nine Tails chakra. 1951 words. Chapter 94, the combination of Hashirama cells and Nine Tails chakra. I hope to use some of Shodai-sama's cells to conduct a few experiments, and I hope to receive your permission, Mito-sama. Looking at Uzumaki Mito in front of him, Kay spoke calmly. Compared to the Kinkaku brothers, the cells of the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama, were even more exceptional research material. Or rather, for Kay, the latter was far more important than the former. The Kinkaku brothers were only suspected atavistic inheritors of the Six Paths bloodline, but Hashirama was the reincarnation of Ashura, one of the Sage of Six Paths' direct sons. As the reincarnation of Ashura's chakra, Hashirama's cells naturally carried the power of Ashura's chakra within them. That was something Kay could not afford to ignore. Hashirama's cells. Hearing Kay's words, Mito could not help but fall silent. After a long while, she finally spoke. If I refuse, what do you intend to do next? Then I will seal off this experiment. Kay's expression remained calm. I will wait until after your passing, Mito-sama, and then I will reopen it. As those words fell, the atmosphere in the room froze once more. Behind them, Kagami and the others, who had come with Kay, all lowered their heads at once, desperately trying to reduce their presence as though afraid of drawing Mito's attention. Kay had not hidden his words from them at all. Listening to the exchange between the two, Kagami and the others could not help wiping the cold sweat from their backs. At that moment, they all felt a bit resentful toward Kay. Hokage-sama, even if you wanted to do this, couldn't you at least do it in secret? Why say it directly in front of Uzumaki Mito herself? Asking a wife to her face whether you could use her husband's cells for experiments. No matter how anyone looked at it, that really did not seem appropriate. The people present all felt the same. Mito remained silent for a long time before finally speaking again. You truly dare to speak plainly. Still, it can be considered honest. She seemed to think of something, then let out a quiet sigh. In this regard, you are different from Tobirama. If Tobirama were here, he probably wouldn't say anything at all, and would simply do it in secret. I know that he was also secretly researching Hashirama's cells. He just never mentioned it to me. In that sense, you are better than he was. The second Hokage, Tobirama, had indeed carried out many forbidden experiments. Among them, Hashirama's cells, as outstanding research material, had naturally been studied by him as well, though he had not produced many visible results. Still, the related research had clearly continued all along. Otherwise, where would that stockpile of Hashirama cells in later Konoha have come from? Do as you wish. Mito spoke softly. I do not intend to interfere with whatever experiments you carry out, and researching Hashirama's cells is not something I will stop. But there is one thing I must remind you of. I do not care what sort of experiments you conduct, and I do not care if you research Hashirama's cells. But you cannot place the people of the village on your operating table, nor can you turn your hand against your own people. Do you understand what I mean? Mito looked at him seriously as she spoke. I understand. Kei smiled. Even if you had not reminded me, I would never do such a thing. I am Konoha's Hokage. I cannot allow Konoha's people to be sacrificed for nothing. It is good that you think that way. Mito nodded slightly. On this point, she was still willing to trust Kei. Compared to others, the way he handled things was undoubtedly more open and restrained. He would not easily descend into that sort of extreme. Her words just now had only been a warning. Afterward, Kei accompanied Mito for a short walk around the area, and only then did she prepare to leave. Before departing, however, she suddenly offered a reminder. That child Tsunade misses you very much. If you have time, you should go see her. You are both young. Getting a little closer to one another would not be a bad thing. She looked at Kei meaningfully, the implication in her words quite obvious. Kei paused for a moment, then smiled and nodded. I understand. Once I finish the work at hand, I will go find her. As it happens, I have a few ideas about techniques lately that I would like to share with her. Just ideas about techniques. That thought flashed through Mito's mind, but in the end she only shook her head inwardly. Granddaughter, Grandma can only help you this much. Thinking of Tsunade's worried expression from earlier, that was the thought that crossed her heart. Let's begin the testing. A moment later, after Mito had left, Kei stood where he was and addressed the people around him. Start with Ginkaku. He had not brought Mito here merely to take a stroll. There was work to be done. After finally obtaining such exceptional research material, he naturally had to begin studying it as soon as possible. Soon, the research formally began. The first results came from the Kinkaku brothers' cells. The findings showed that, compared to ordinary human cells, the vitality of the two brothers' cells was astonishingly strong. Among them, Ginkaku's corpse, despite having been dead for many days already, still displayed active cellular characteristics. Although that activity was not as exaggerated as Hashirama's cells, it was still shocking enough. What a pity. After researching for a while, Kei could not help feeling a bit regretful. If only I had their original cells. The Kinkaku brothers' bodies had already been transformed by Nine Tails chakra, and even their cells had fused with that power and changed. Kei suspected that the Nine Tails chakra must have activated something hidden within their cells, which was why they gained the ability to generate Nine Tails chakra and transform into something like miniature Nine Tails themselves. Unfortunately, he had no samples of their cells from before they acquired the Nine Tails chakra, so he had no basis for comparison, and could not determine exactly what had changed. After that, he also studied Hashirama's cells for some time. And with only a simple test, he discovered something strangely familiar within them. As expected, it is this. Standing in place and feeling the power hidden in the Hashirama cells, Kei's expression gradually turned solemn. The power of the divine tree. Ordinary people might not have been able to sense this sort of thing. But Kei, who in another life had once been the daimyo of the ancestral land, and had spent many years in contact with the divine tree, could still recognize it even though it was exceedingly faint. Within Hashirama's cells, there truly existed a trace of the divine tree's power. It was precisely that tiny strand of divine tree chakra that gave Hashirama's cells their extraordinary vitality, allowing them to far surpass ordinary human cells. Seen from that perspective, the true reason for Hashirama's overwhelming power was finally made clear. As Ashura's reincarnation, he had evidently used that status as a catalyst to grasp a portion of the divine tree's power. At its core, the divine tree was a Kekii Mora. Whether one spoke of the 10 tails or even the Rinnegan, all of it was ultimately just a manifestation of the divine tree's power. If Hashirama had managed to wield a portion of that power, then his terrifying strength suddenly made perfect sense. It also resolved a doubt Kay had long carried. That doubt was the true origin of wood release. In theory, wood release was merely a bloodline limit formed by the fusion of earth and water. But in reality, who had ever truly managed to create such a thing that way? And yet saying it came directly from Ashura's chakra did not make much sense either. After all, it was difficult to say whether Ashura himself had ever even possessed wood release. As the younger son of the Sage of Six Paths, what Ashura inherited should have been the pure sage body, not some additional mutated attribute. Compared to that, Hashirama had simply become far too strong. To put it bluntly, let alone Madara, even if Ashura himself had stood in front of Hashirama, it would have been hard to say who would actually come out on top. If not for the Sage of Six Paths personally granting power to his later reincarnation, Naruto, and awakening his true sage body and Six Paths sage mode, then even with Kurama's power in hand, Naruto would probably only have been fit to carry Hashirama's shoes. And the source of that overwhelming gap, in the final analysis, was wood release. But if that's the case, then... A thought stirred in Kay's mind, and he immediately moved to test it. He guided a portion of Nine Tails chakra out from Ginkaku's body, then combined it with a sample of Hashirama cells. Sure enough, a miraculous change appeared at once. The originally violent Nine Tails chakra became docile the moment it came into contact with Hashirama's cells, shifting from berserk to extraordinarily stable. At the same time, the Hashirama cells became unusually active. Under Kay's careful observation, the Nine Tails chakra was directly devoured by the Hashirama cells and vanished completely. It was eaten directly. Kay observed everything closely. After devouring the Nine Tails chakra, the Hashirama cells underwent an obvious transformation. The power inside them became stronger, their activity intensified, and their overall state began to resemble the cells of the Kinkaku brothers. It actually works. The facts prove that Kay's hypothesis was correct. Hashirama's cells, which carried the divine tree's power, really did possess the ability to devour tailed beast chakra and enter a state similar to the cells within the Kinkaku brothers. No, to a certain extent, the change was even more thorough. After all, what Hashirama's cells contained was the power of the divine tree itself. And the tailed beast chakra had originally been split from the 10 tails, which in essence was simply another part of the divine tree. That was likely also the reason why wood release could suppress tailed beasts and absorb their chakra. However, compared to the Kinkaku brothers, the changes in Hashirama's cells were only temporary. In just a brief moment, after the Nine Tails chakra had been consumed, the cells reverted to their previous state, as if nothing had happened. Kay guessed that this was because the tailed beast's flesh and blood had not truly fused with the Hashirama cells. Simply absorbing chakra was not enough to permanently alter the structure of the cells. Just like the Kinkaku brothers themselves, if they had only absorbed Nine Tails chakra instead of actually swallowing its flesh and blood, then it would have been impossible for the Nine Tails power to merge with them so deeply and turn them into artificial tailed beasts. A fusion of chakra was only temporary. A fusion of flesh and blood was far more stable. Which then raised a new problem. Where exactly was he supposed to get tailed beast flesh and blood? Kay's gaze slowly fixed once more on the Nine Tails. In the current Konoha, the only tailed beast available was the Nine Tails sealed inside Mito. Without hesitating in the slightest, he turned and walked straight out of the laboratory. If you don't want to wait for the next update, read 50 chapters ahead on p@trian.com/fanficlord03, Chapter 95, Deal with the Nine Tails. 1128 words. Chapter 95, Deal with the Nine Tails. You want the Nine Tails' flesh and blood? Mito looked at Kay, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. Kay nodded and selectively explained the experimental results he had obtained so far. To think Hashirama's cells could do something like what the Kinkaku brothers did, actually contain a tailed beast chakra. Mito murmured, then narrowed her eyes in thought. Or is this also one of Wood Release's abilities? Although she did not know about the chakra of the divine tree, she immediately connected it to Wood Release's suppressive power over tailed beasts. For a tailed beast, Wood Release was almost like a natural predator. That absolute suppression was overwhelming, even more oppressive than the Uchiha clan's Sharingan. With Wood Release as precedent, it no longer sounded so strange that Hashirama's cells could contain tailed beast chakra. I'm afraid I can't help you with that. Mito shook her head, her tone helpless. Even though the Nine Tails is sealed inside me, it is not something that can be controlled so easily. Obtaining that beast flesh and blood is not that simple. Although she was the Nine Tails Jinchuriki and possessed strength great enough to suppress the Nine Tails, she still could not extract its flesh and blood under these circumstances. The Nine Tails was sealed within her. To take anything from it, the seal would have to be damaged. And once a Jinchuriki broke the seal and released a tailed beast, death was the only outcome. I understand. Kay nodded slightly. That is why I want to meet it. You intend to persuade it yourself. Mito understood at once. That will not be easy. Even though she was not optimistic, she did not refuse. After a brief pause, she nodded and agreed. She had Kay place a hand on her shoulder, then performed a technique. In the next moment, guided by chakra, Kay's consciousness was pulled forward and arrived before a dark cage. A violent, terrifying chakra filled the space, pressing down like a storm that never ended. Kay lifted his gaze. A cage formed from sealing techniques stood before him, and inside it, a tailed beast massive enough to feel like a natural disaster lay imprisoned. So this is the Nine Tails. Kay looked up, a trace of surprise flashing across his face. For him, this was the first time he had ever seen a tailed beast in person. And the Nine Tails before him was far more imposing than he had imagined. Its body was enormous. Even lying still, it resembled a small mountain, radiating a frightening sense of pressure. Behind it, Nine Tails spread out quietly, stirring an indescribable dread. An unfamiliar presence. Inside the cage, sensing Kay's arrival, the Nine Tails slowly opened its eyes. Another one coveting this old man's power. Its gaze swept over him, then paused. It seems you're just a brat. My name is Minamikawa Yu. Kay stood firm beneath that gaze and spoke evenly. Of course, you can also call me by my other name. Uchiha Kay. Uchiha Kay. The Nine Tails' eyes froze for a moment. It studied Kay's face carefully, as if confirming something. An Uchiha. After a pause, it continued, voice lower, more suspicious. Yet you seem different from the usual Uchiha. It looked Kay over again, uncertainty in its tone. As a tailed beast that had existed for countless years, it had encountered many Uchiha, and was very familiar with their nature. There was indeed the aura of the Sharingan on Kay. Yet it could not sense that cold, ominous chakra signature typical of the Uchiha clan, that demonic edge that always clung to them. Kay's presence was calm and warm instead, peaceful in a way that felt almost out of place. If Kay had not introduced himself and revealed his identity, it might have mistaken him for someone from the Senju. The Uchiha are a broad clan. All kinds of people exist within it. Kay answered softly. It's not strange for a few different ones to appear. He did not waste time. Nine Tails, let's make a deal. I want a piece of your pure flesh and blood. You want my flesh and blood? The Nine Tails laughed coldly. On what grounds? You people have trapped me here. I haven't even settled that score, and now you want something from me. It sneered. If you're willing to undo the seal and let me out, then maybe I'll consider it. Undoing the seal is impossible. Kay's expression did not change. But if it's only about letting you out, that can be arranged. The Nine-Tails' eyes widened slightly. Without breaking the seal, how could it be released? A method similar to a shadow clone. Kay spoke plainly. I can use your flesh and blood as a sample to create a new body for you, a flesh and blood clone. After that, you can project your consciousness into it. You would be able to leave the seal and appear in the outside world. This is a compromise. I wonder if you can accept it. A flesh and blood clone. The Nine-Tails sounded doubtful. Such a thing exists. Call it a new technique. Kay's tone remained calm. As long as you agree, you can leave this cage. After that, as long as you remain within my sight, you can do whatever you want. Is that so? The Nine-Tails fell silent. For a long moment, it considered the offer, and the temptation in its eyes grew. To be honest, being locked inside a cage was not a pleasant experience. Losing freedom was one thing. But the worst part was the emptiness. There was nothing here. Even if it wanted to pass time in some way, it could do nothing. A tailed beast was still a sentient being with awareness, and the ability to feel boredom. If it could leave this cage, even under someone's watch, that was still far better than being imprisoned forever. After thinking for a while, it finally nodded. With that agreement, a piece of flesh and blood separated and flew out, landing directly in Kay's hand. Thank you. Kay was slightly surprised by how straightforward it had been. He had expected far more trouble to achieve his goal. But regardless, finishing things cleanly was a good outcome. He gave his thanks, then turned to leave. After Kay's consciousness withdrew, only the Nine-Tails remained in the dark cage. That boy has a familiar aura. It stared in the direction Kay had vanished, doubt slowly rising in its heart. That presence feels similar to the old man's 6 paths. If you don't want to wait for the next update, read 50 chapters ahead on patreon.com/fanficlord03, Chapter 96, Chapter 96, Little 91270 for words Chapter 96, Little Nine-Tails clone. The karma on Kay's body came from Otsutsuki Kagaya, and Otsutsuki Kagaya was none other than the mother of the Sage of 6 Paths, Otsutsuki Hagoromo. After being altered by karma, the aura around Kay now carried a faint resemblance to that of the Sage of 6 Paths himself. That was precisely why the Nine-Tails had been so easy to deal with. From Kay, it had sensed a strange familiarity. Because of that, it had readily agreed to his request instead of refusing. Of course, another reason was its own desire to escape this place and gain as much freedom as possible. First, I let my consciousness leave this cage. Then, I find a chance to free my real body. Inside the cage, thoughts churn through the Nine-Tails' mind. When that time comes, I'll make everyone pay the price. Thinking of the people it had encountered in the past, a terrifying killing intent surfaced in the Nine-Tails' eyes. The hostility there was almost impossible to suppress, like a world-shaking demon whose malice knew no bounds. After reaching an agreement with the Nine-Tails, Kay withdrew his chakra, and his consciousness returned to his own body. It seems you came to an agreement. Uzumaki Mito looked at Kay curiously. A flesh and blood clone, how exactly can a method like that be achieved? She had naturally heard the conversation between Kay and the Nine-Tails just now. After all, that had been the sealing space within her own body. With her control over chakra, nothing that happened there could be hidden from her. This is a technique created on the basis of the spirit transformation technique, and the mind-body switch technique. Kay had no intention of hiding it. In fact, even the most basic shadow clone already possesses the ability to transfer consciousness. The reason a shadow clone cannot exist for long is simply because of its chakra consumption. As long as a body can be created that can contain consciousness and persist for a long time, then transferring consciousness into it is not difficult. In Kay's previous life, achieving consciousness transfer would have been unimaginably difficult, or perhaps simply impossible. But in this world, it was much easier. The shadow clone technique itself already produced clones that carried independent awareness. The spirit transformation technique could materialize spiritual power for various uses. The Yamanaka clan's mind-body switch technique could directly force one's consciousness into another body. And Orochimaru's later living corpse reincarnation went even further, infecting another person with his own consciousness and forcibly taking over their body. At its core, chakra itself carried the imprint of individual consciousness. By using that property, transferring consciousness was not difficult. Compared to those techniques, what Kei was attempting now was only a slight improvement. A shadow clone could already split off a body carrying its own consciousness. The reason it could not last was simply because its chakra reserves were limited, and continuous consumption inevitably led to dissipation. But if one created a body that could continuously produce and sustain chakra, then keeping a clone active for a long period was not a problem. However, to properly match the consciousness placed inside it, that body could not simply be someone else's. It had to maintain a high degree of compatibility with the original. In other words, it had to be specially tailored. For that kind of operation, Kei already had an idea. Back in the laboratory, he took out the piece of flesh the Ninetales had given him. Even though it was just a piece of meat, the Ninetales had been unexpectedly generous, and the amount was not small. After all, the Ninetales' body was enormous. Even a tiny fragment from it was still huge by human standards. So this is yin-yang release, truly incredible. Looking at the Ninetales' flesh in his hand, Kei smiled faintly, finding it rather remarkable. The nine-tailed beasts had originally been split from the chakra of the 10 tails. By all logic, they should not have possessed ordinary physical bodies at all. It was the Sage of Six Paths who used his masterful yin-yang release to shape bodies for them, allowing them to become real living beings with flesh and blood. And that was also the origin of a tailed beast's endlessly regenerating chakra. Standing in the laboratory, Kei thought for a moment, then carefully extracted a single drop of the Ninetales' blood. He placed it into different culture media, pairing it with various life-form genes. Those biological samples came from many different creatures of the shinobi world, including both ordinary animals and numerous summoned beasts. Very quickly, the compatibility results appeared. Unsurprisingly, the genes that proved most compatible with the Ninetales' flesh and blood were those of fox-type summoned beasts. So the Ninetales' fox-like appearance was likely no coincidence after all. When the Sage of Six Paths used yin-yang release to create the nine-tailed beasts, he had probably incorporated the genes of many shinobi world creatures into them, shaping the different appearances of each beast. And among all those possibilities, the one most compatible with the Ninetales was clearly the lineage of fox-type summoned beasts. After thinking for a moment, Kei continued his work. To be honest, integrating the Ninetales cells perfectly into a human body would not be easy at all. The difficulty would be no less than integrating Hashirama's cells. But that was not what Kei needed. He did not require perfect integration, nor did he intend to fuse it into a human body. He only needed to use the Ninetales' genetic material as a sample, screen for genes that could match it, and then use those to manufacture a usable body. As for how weak that body might be, that was outside the scope of his concern. As long as it could be used, that was enough. Working under that standard, the difficulty naturally dropped by a great deal. Before long, the body of a young fox was successfully cultivated. A bit troublesome. Kei observed the body and could not help shaking his head. It's a bit too weak. If the real Ninetales was a calamity-level demonic beast, then the body in front of him was merely an ordinary creature that happened to possess chakra. Its base had only been that of a common ninja beast. And perhaps because it had been artificially cloned, the body's natural quality seemed to have been affected. Even among ninja beasts, it could only be considered rather weak. Forget it. As long as it's barely usable. That thought crossed Kei's mind, and soon after, he went to find Uzumaki Mito again. You've come. Inside the familiar dark cage, the Ninetales' crimson eyes slowly opened, fixed on Kei standing before it. I'm here to fulfill our agreement. Kay stood calmly and spoke in a soft voice. Close your eyes and do not resist. The Ninetales nodded, relaxing its entire body, and at that moment, a trace of anticipation could not help but rise in its heart. After being trapped in this cage for so many years, it had almost begun to forget what the outside world even looked like. Now that it was finally about to see that world again, even as a tailed beast, it could not help but feel a sense of anticipation. Outside the cage, Kay looked at the Ninetales before him as it settled into stillness, then began to move. Spirit Transformation Technique. The forbidden technique created by the second Hokage was cast by his hand. If you don't want to wait for the next update, read 50 chapters ahead on patreon.com/fanficlord03 Dawn. Forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.